Hiya, this is Vic Highland. We're going to be talking about practice techniques today. This is something which I feel is very important because often when you go and have lessons, you're told to practice, but you're not actually told how to practice. You may be just told that you've got to run through the pieces for half an hour or whatever. But there are very distinct sort of psychological techniques that you can use to help learn. The first time I came across anything like this was a number of years ago. I was about 18 at the time, and I was very lucky to go on a seminar about guitar playing with the great Barney Kessel, the jazz guitar player. And Kessel had very distinct ideas about how memory works, and a lot of these ideas I discovered later were almost the sort of formative NLP technologies, and I want to share some of these with you today. A lot of it is based on what we understand of how the mind stores information. So the first thing to do, if you think about practice generally, it's one of these things that you can spend half an hour doing something and you've got really nothing to show for it at the end of that period of time, and that can be quite dispiriting for people. So one of the ways of working on this is to have a way of making practice sort of tangible, and one of the simple techniques is just to make a list of what you're going to practice, because that part of it is a very conscious, analytical way of sort of making a plan, creating an intention, and giving yourself a series of goals. And originally, obviously, this would have been just a written down, but I suggest that once you've got a basic template, you put this on the computer and you can run this off, and then you can adapt it each time that you practice. Now, the key things to bear in mind is that the list that you create of goals for that period of time should be achievable and measurable. So first of all, the way you would do these is you would make a list of what needs to be done. So let's hypothetically look at it that you're going to do an exam, and you're doing an RGT exam, you've got a series of scales to practice, and you've got a series of chords to learn and some progressions to play through. So what you would do is you would make a list to say, for the sake of argument, we're going to do grade 1, okay? So the grade 1 list, you're looking at your scales, and let's say you're going to practice each of the scales. So we'll put them down: E blues, E natural minor, A pentatonic minor, and so on. So what you do then is you work out how many times you're going to play them through. So let's say you're pretty good at the E blues and you're going to play that 3 times through. The E natural minor you're not so good at, let's say, and you've got a problem with it, the descending part of the scale. So you're going to play it up times 3, but down 6 times. The pentatonic minor, let's say you're okay with that, so you're going to play that 3 times through, and so on. Now the idea of this is you start to create a bias for the things that you need to work at, and that's a good thing that the intellectual part of your brain is good at doing. Whereas of course if you just pick up the guitar and start playing, you will just default to the easy thing. Alright, so let's carry on. Chords. Let's say you need to work on your major 7 chords, and you would say you're going to play those through times 10 or whatever. The major chords you're good at, so you're going to play each of them once through. Minor chords and so on. Alright, so again that creates that. Now what you're going to do with this list once you've got it. So it literally is, I've just scribbled it out like that for the moment, all right? The idea is that you go through each of these things. You're not allocating time to those. These are measurable, achievable things. When they're done, cross them off. There is something like giving yourself a star to say, hey, look, I've done that. I've achieved this. So once you've done something the allotted amount of times, you move on. You don't go back and do more. It's like you've got a pact with your unconscious that you do that. So at the end of it, you should end up with a bunch of crossed out bits of things that you've achieved, right? Then you go on until that's complete. If for some reason you don't complete that list, the next thing that you do is you add that to the list for the next day. So you've got to work out, and first of all, this is going to be tricky, but over a period of time, you will realise what you can achieve within a day. So if you've got a practicing pattern of say half an hour, and obviously the more the merrier, because the more time you put in, the better you're going to become. But let's say for the moment it's half an hour. If you work out what you can do within half an hour, that means that you can then, if you have less than half an hour's practice in a particular day, you carry forward the work. But another interesting thing about this style of practicing, and I adopt this for rehearsing with a band as well, the quicker you can get through the stuff, the more powerful it becomes. I know that sounds sort of contrary to what you would expect, but getting that sort of aspect of your unconscious mind on board with this sort of motivator of getting things done is very powerful. So I would just say you crack on with stuff, get it done and move on. So you might find that you'll have a bit of extra time left over. Now there's nothing wrong with you actually going on and doing some stuff for the next day, or if that helps. Okay, so that's an important point. Now, if you find, as a lot of people will, that you spend a bit of time practicing and then you realise you've wandered off, you've gone off message, and you've started playing some pieces of music that you already know, they don't need practicing, they're not actually part of what you need to do, blah, 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 blah. I would actually put aside within your practicing time a period of time for those off-message moments, or just having a bit of fun, having a jam session, whatever. So it's not all work, work, work. There's a sort of a fun element in there. So this will actually take you towards your goal, and each day you are recalibrating what needs to be practiced so that you're working towards that. Now, the other thing, the practice should encapsulate all the things you need to do. So that means to say, if you're doing an exam, you've got to cover the spoken tests, oral tests, improvisation, and one of it. And you might have some other things that you've got to do. You may have some GCSE work, you may have some work for, I don't know, some project that's linked to Duke of Edinburgh, maybe a concert you've got coming up, at school, it may be whatever. So each of those things should cover what you're doing. Now, a couple of other things about techniques of practice. Learning things like chords, for instance. A lot of people learn chords and scales as shapes, and they don't know the names. And of course, in an exam situation, that's no good, because an examiner is going to ask you, can you play me the scale of? And if you don't know which one it is, but you just know a series of patterns, you're not going to be able to answer that, are you? So one way of doing this, to set yourself back from using a reference book, is to have a series of flashcards or something, or bits of paper with the name of the scale on and the beginning of the scale. The first couple of notes, anything that will jog your memory to what that scale is. After you've done that for a little while, then reduce that just to the name of the scale. Put that into a box or whatever, you draw it out at random. That's a very important bit, so that you're not learning things in a particular order, that there is a sort of a shortcut mentality that's going on in your mind. Because one of the things I've noticed as an examiner and also as a teacher, that people will learn things in particular ways. So you can say to them, oh, can you play me the scale of whatever? And they'll look blankly at you. And if you say, oh, it's the first one in the book, they'll be able to do that. Or it's the last one in the book. Or it's that shape that looks like a triangle. People can answer things like that, but they won't necessarily know the name because they haven't learnt it that way. So the way to learn a name of something is to actually physically say it as you're playing it. You may feel a bit of a chump doing that, but it does work. Because if you think about how you learn the names of people, say you went to a party or whatever, the easiest way to do that is look them straight in the eye and shake hands with them and say their name. Hello, Harry, how are you? Type of thing. Nice to meet you. And then, you might have some sort of mental trick that you use to think of, oh, this person looks like somebody who is a friend of mine who is also called Harry. So you sort of superimpose the two faces on one another in your mind just to sort of do that. Or you might know somebody called Henry and you think, oh, King Henry. Oh yeah, think of Henry, a crown on his head. That type of thing. These are memory tricks that are used by people who are very good at learning names very quickly. And those techniques are great for learning chords and scales. Think of something, if you think of A major 7, for instance, in a grade 1 book, and it's sort of a triangular shape, you might think of that as some sort of crown or a captain's insignia or something like that. Anything. It doesn't matter how wacky these ideas are, as long as they mean something to you when you're trying to remember. One little trick that I use at grade 1 is if you take the B7 shape that is given in the book and then move that across a string, that shape, and then of course obviously the shape changes slightly, one of the fingers sort of effectively drops off the end of the guitar. That triangular shape becomes then the A major 7. You move it down another string or across another string and that becomes the D7 shape. Of course that spells the word bad. So it's B7, A major 7 and D7, bad. So a little mnemonic or anagram or whatever you want to call it helps you remember that set of chords. So that's a good system. Another thing is to, as I say, randomise things. With scales, you could take a dice and throw a dice, and then 1 to 6, you could nominate which number represents which scale. And so it goes on. So at random that you're practicing your scales. Okay. A couple of things with chord progressions. Obviously the ones that are marked in the book, and this obviously works really well for things like songwriting and just general practice of patterns of chords. You can reorganise the chords. You can randomise the chords in the book so that they create sort of crazy chord progressions. So each chord goes on a piece of paper that's then, separate piece of paper that's put into a box. You draw them out like a little slip of paper, and then that creates like a series of bars of chords. So, be creative about your practice. I'm only just talking about the material that's within the grade 1 RGT. But if you take songs of other people and start messing around with chords in that way, you're going to come up with really good ideas. Okay. So that sort of covers a few of those things. A few of the other videos that sort of focus specifically on spoken tests, oral tests, I cover a couple of techniques in those. Okay, so in a nutshell, make a list. Make the list achievable. As you go through things, cross them off. You can have a template that's on the computer that you run off and then adapt. And feel good about what you're achieving. You will progress doing this because it's focused. Not all practice needs to be focused, but when you're trying to achieve something like this, you are actually programming information in. And as soon as we look at the idea of programming information in, that's where this stuff becomes important. So best of luck with everything. Enjoy what you're doing, and I'll see you on the other side.